Good evening and welcome to the first night of the Institute on National Affairs. As you know, this year's topic is Art in America Today, a Public Matter. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to remind you of the events for tomorrow. Starting tomorrow at 10 till 4, Roberta Kramer will be working in fiber in the north lobby of Carver Hall. At noon, Jean Stamsta will be giving a slide presentation on weaving. Her work is primarily in large standing structures. Tomorrow night, Michael Straight, past deputy and present chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, will be speaking on why taxpayers should support the arts. And now to come to tonight's speaker, Ronald Bladen. He is probably most recently known in Iowa for his work, which will be appearing in front of the Henry Wallace Agricultural Building in Des Moines. His other works include The Rockers and Kama Sutra. He has indicated to me that he'd be more than willing and looks forward to answering any questions that you have following his presentation tonight. And also, I'd like to remind you that there will be a reception following upstairs outside of the Brunier Gallery. So we'd like to invite you all to come and view the Papa John collection there. And now, Mr. Bladen.
I think that I would be most comfortable just simply to plunge immediately into showing you slides of my work. I really would like also very much to have questions. If questions occur to you at the time that the slides are on, please ask them. But after the slides are over, then we'll have a question period, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions at all. Okay? I'm going to give you dimensions and certain specifics about the pieces so that you understand them. Most of my work is very, very large, getting bigger all the time, so it seems most logical that I am really a public sculptor and no longer in a gallery situation. This piece is really not possible to do unless you do it under certain circumstance. The piece itself is 9 feet 4 inches high, 13 feet across the top, and it was an attempt to make an object stand on its point. You can't do that. It's an impossibility unless you bolt it to the floor or you indulge in some other gymnastics, which I really don't like to do. So in order to make it possible, this piece is a kind of fake. It has a base to it that flares from 2 inches at either end to 15 inches in the center. In that center, I was able to get about 300 pounds of weight, and that's what's holding it up. It's just balanced. Now, the other consideration was that the piece is 9 foot 4 inches high, and it was done in a space that had a ceiling of 9 feet 6 inches, so it could not fall over. At any rate, I felt that I was quite successful, although I was constantly being accused of having the piece strung up on wires, which is not true. Anyway, the piece, this is a wooden version of the piece I built myself, and the piece was eventually sold and put in a site outside on a collector's lawn outside of New York City, and was refabricated in steel. And there we used a cement foundation, and we had a keel. And we slid the piece down on that keel. We had a steel plate 1 inch thick, 10 feet long, and 36 inches deep. And 18 inches went up into the piece, and 18 inches went down to the cement, and that's what's holding it up. And this is the steel version being taken off the truck. It's quarter-inch plate steel. And there it is, more or less installed. The ground gets covered over the foundation afterwards. It looked, finally, when it was erected, it looked like a very strange surreal object. And originally the piece had a slight bulge in the center, which you couldn't see from the front or from the back. And I liked the bulge so much that I kept it in when it was refabricated. So there's a slight curvature, which you feel more than see. Okay, next piece. This is a piece that's 22 feet wide, 15 feet deep, and 9 feet 4 inches high again. It's white in the front and black on the back. The surface was slightly tilted, so that there was a tremendous illusion when you walked into it. You couldn't find where the horizon was. You just more or less fell into it. The black line underneath the piece became very important. It's a shadow line, and it's caused simply by raising the piece up off the floor a little bit, so it has a floating effect. This piece has not been built in a permanent material. It's stored away, which is one of the problems of sculpture today, is what do you do with the work afterwards? It becomes a tremendous burden that many, many sculptors have to deal with, and it's a problem that's not really been solved yet, storage. This piece is 22 feet wide, 30 feet long, and it was pitched so that it, in the front, it was 18 inches off the floor. In the back, it rose to 28, so that there was an incline. It also had much to do with illusion. When you looked at it, there would be flashing after images of vibrations all over the piece, like almost as if there were energy rising from it. In this slide, it appears to be a cube, which is not true. It's perfectly flat on top, and each U-shape decreased in size until it reached the center. The darker areas are just simply shadow lines caused by the spaces in between the U's. This piece is called the X, which is what it is, and was built for a show in Washington in the Corcoran Art Gallery in a show which had to do with space as content. It was built outside and then installed, taken down there and installed. It's 22 feet high, 24 feet wide, and 14 feet deep. It was, afterwards, it was sold, and it's now existing in West Palm Beach in Florida, in front of Lake Worth. We had a big crew working night and day once we were in the museum, putting the rest of the piece together. And the initial structure I built myself outside in front of a barn in Woodstock. And the piece, when fabricated, was fabricated in aluminum. This piece is 56 feet 3 inches long, and it went up to 11 feet at the highest point. It was originally built for a show inside and then was taken outside in a number of other shows. And strangely enough, when it went outside, it appeared bigger than it did when it was inside in a more confined space. It was an odd thing to see happen. Right now it's outside in spending the winter to see how it will survive the snow, etc., in a place in Woodstock. This piece has not yet been fabricated in steel. There were a lot of problems with this installation. We had some vandalism. I don't know if it was a vandalism or amusement, but a lot of kids would get on the piece and slide down it, and finally it brought it down. I had to reinstall it and in a much firmer way. The title of this piece is Three Elements, and it's about, was about done in about 1964 or 65, and it was in a show in New York at the Jewish Museum called the Primary Structure Show. It was one of those unusual things that happen not very often in one's lifetime, but I sold the piece the night of the opening, and because I sold it to a particular individual, then the Modern Museum bought it, and then the Los Angeles County Museum bought it. So there was an edition of 3, and they were constructed in aluminum with a polished aluminum surface. And one copy of this piece right now is in front of the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington. The piece always had possibilities of having the elements set at least 10 feet apart, and if the opportunity arose, they could be 25 or 30 or 40, depending upon the situation, depending upon the environment. So the one in Washington right now is set at 34 feet apart, and it has very much to do with space, and also very much to do with the sun. When the sun strikes the piece, it lights up very much. It's like a ball of fire. There it is again. The piece on the black piece on the right is another piece that was used recently. These are older pieces that haven't been shown that much, and they've been in storage, and when they're taken out of storage, you find that there are missing parts, and you have to do some reconstruction, and it's always a little bit of a headache to do that and have to deal with it. Here's the piece outside, and you can see the light, the reflection of the sun on the grass, and the other piece is in the back. This piece is called Cathedral Evening. It's 30 feet long, 10 feet high at the highest point, 24 feet wide. And this is a wooden version of the piece. It was shown at the Walker Art Center, was commissioned by them for a show. And the piece was eventually sold and now is built in steel at the Albany Mall in New York State. These pieces are built in sections, and they all come apart so that they can be moved easily, and they can go in and out of doorways, up and down stairs, to deal with the situations in New York City, which are very difficult physically to handle. This is a steel version of the piece. The steel construction becomes very difficult to deal with because they haven't found a way yet to deal with the welding scars and structural scars that show up on the outside, so that sometimes you have to have a special job done on the surface, which requires more money and means that it's not as fluid a process as it should be in terms of steel. Aluminum gives a better opportunity for a good surface. These pieces are really supposed to, by their scale and by their presence, supposed to be able to exist in a scale outside which is much more vast than attempting to deal with something in a confined space. I feel sometimes that it's a difficult process. When something is taken outside, it can become smaller because of the environment. But if it's invested with a certain kind of presence at the beginning, I think that presence goes with it and enables it to exist outside almost with an equal basis in terms of the relationship of much larger shapes like mountains, etc. This piece was built for a show in San Francisco at the Modern Museum. It is 53 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 20 feet high. And it's built completely in sections to be taken apart and put together. I tend to overbuild, at least that's what I'm accused of, but I find that it makes it more reasonable in terms of the safety of the piece and safety of people, and also makes it possible to be able to move around easier. So all the sections are bolted together. We had a day and night crew working on this with us. We also had contests to see who could get up the front furthest, running up and running down. It's a piece outside. It was shown twice, once inside and once out. This is in San Diego. The whole idea of the piece was a kind of I wanted to do something that was black and white, and there would be two similar but separate forms. The separation of the form would enable the white to exist. It wouldn't be necessarily a painted board or a painted edge. This site was a very, very large traffic island around which cars went. And we had many cars stopping and asking us what we were doing, what was that? And for a while, were very honest and told him it was a sculpture, but this did no good. They simply wouldn't let us alone. They didn't understand. So we finally came up with a very good answer that they understood, and they'd stop. We'd tell them what it was, and they'd go on their way. And what we decided to tell them was that this is a rocket launcher. And that they understood very well. This is a piece in Buffalo. It's built out of steel, built directly in steel and fabricated immediately without me building a wooden prototype. The piece is 60 feet high, 47 feet long, 5 feet in the front, and flares out to 10 feet in the back. It's owned by the Marine Midland Bank in Buffalo. It's supposed to weigh 48 tons. I'm not sure. Due to certain circumstances, the piece took about 3 years to build. This had much to do with the fabricator's delay and difficulties within his own construction firm and so on. He happened to be under a $1,000 a week penalty clause, so at the end he hurried up a little bit. The reason for the 60-foot height is evident in this slide here. When I had first had the plans for the building, I found out that there was a very strong horizontal, and I found out that the height was 60 feet, and it didn't make any difference to any sense to go beyond that height or below it. So that's why I decided to use the 60-foot height as the correct height for this piece, which relates directly to the height of the strong horizontal in the building. It's where the windows changed. Incidentally, this plaza for this building was a very simple one with hardly any interruption on it at all, a few trees to the side, but basically simple, direct, very large plaza that lent itself very much to a large, simple form. I worked very closely with the architects of the building, who were Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill, and they had an architect in charge of the building who was the building architect, and he was really quite incredible with tremendous sensibility and was very, very helpful and very cooperative. Without his help, this piece might not have been built. It's a very rare thing that an architect can feel or offer or be generous enough to feel the validity of art besides the validity of his building. get a little bit of an idea of the size of the people in relation to the piece here. This piece is about 13 years old. It's called The Rockers. It's a piece that I constantly go back to as a source of many, or the original source of the kind of idea I'm trying to find, or would like to find, or that I find excitement in. The piece is 20 feet high, 14 feet wide, and 12 feet deep. And it's the last piece that I ever used color on. Although I really enjoyed the color on this piece, I do not find it, I can really handle it. So I've been staying away from it and just dealing in black, basically, and white, or black and white. This piece was actually set up on rockers so that it could move, and it did move a little bit in high winds, but it requires a certain amount of weight to hold it up so that it lumbers more than it has grace. It's a back view. It's a bad slide. This happens to be one of an early piece. This was about the third piece that I did, and I really feel that it was a departure in terms of my own images, and I constantly go back to it and think about it and try to stay within that context in terms of future ideas, as much as I base, we'll say, an environment on the source of ideas. And it's been on, this is the first time it's been shown on the ground. It's been shown twice before, but both times on the roof. It was on the roof of NYU, New York, and on the roof of Toronto City Hall in Toronto. It's the first time here that it's shown on the ground. Now, this is a piece that it's a model of the piece that's to go in front of the Henry Wallace Building here in Des Moines. And it's apparently has produced some difficulty, of which I believe at the moment that everything's resolved and that we no longer have difficulties. The piece is 23 feet high, 20 feet wide, and 4 feet deep, and will go directly in front of the Henry Wallace Agricultural Building. And it was designed to bounce off the white wall so that it has complete clarity. Commissions are not easy to get, and once you get them, they're not easy to maintain. And there are problems that keep arising. And sometimes it's a dilemma to know exactly how to carry it out. One of the considerations, or probably the most important consideration, is the building itself and the environment within which the building is. And the building architect, the landscape architect, the feeling that the environment what the environment is. For instance, this environment basically is a governing body environment. For me, that means an idea or an image of some dignity, some kind of presence that has a sensibility. There's also the consideration of the agriculture, as Iowa being a state of largely agriculture. So these things are important. They're important to the people who want the sculpture. They're important to, we say, the people who live in the state, who perhaps aren't that close to art, but they are going to be in the process of seeing this perhaps every day or from time to time. So to come up with an idea that would satisfy all parties is not that easy. And from the sculptor's point of view, he really does deal with the authority of art very much, and he does believe in the autonomy of art. He uses the building as a source of ideas, and he pays a great deal of attention to what the building stands for, what the state stands for, the personal feelings that the building architect may have, the fact that we'll say the landscape architect is very involved in his own creation, which in this case happened to be a grove of trees. These things become part of getting a commission, and one has to pay attention to them in order to have everything come to fruition. And it is not easy. It requires possibly some compromise on all parts. Probably an ideal arrangement might be, if it were possible, for all three people, the building architect, the landscape architect, and the artist, to get together before prior plans are made in terms of landscaping, what the building, how it should look, how much space is to be permitted to be used as a site of a sculpture, how important reflecting pools are. These things are, I think, very important. It would never come up at all. And the process of producing a sculpture would be much more amenable to all concerned. At any rate, this is a piece that we're planning, and at the moment the plans are being engineered, and after that we're going to find a fabricator here in Des Moines, in the area, and have it built here and installed hopefully in the spring. This is what we're aiming for. Yeah. The top edge? I mean, right at the very top of the two columns.
No, I mean the actual edge at the bottom of that beam. Because I think it'll make a difference in how the piece comes across. If it's a rounded edge, it's one thing. If it's a very sharp edge, it's something else.
You,
Focus on the silver part, the bottom of the
yeah, right.
The slope in the back.
Pardon me?
The junction of the slope in the back.
How sharp will it be? The piece is pitched in the back, in the front. It's 8 feet from the ground. In the back, it's 10 feet 6 inches, so there's over 4 feet, there's a 2 foot 6 inch rise. Does this answer your question?
Not exactly. When you have two pieces of steel come together, you can have various kinds of edges at that very junction. Will this be like a razor sharp edge, or will this be like a welded joint? Because I think it would make it
I still don't understand the question, I'm sorry. I'm not assuming that there's going to be any seam there at all. I'm assuming there's no seam there. Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is what will the finish of that seam, or what will the finish of that place on the piece be? We can talk about it later.
Okay. I'm trying to do the piece with as few seams as possible. There will be no seam in the U proper at that point, as far as I can see. If there are any seams, they'll be on the column part. Okay, move on to another piece. This is a piece that's in front of Central Park at the moment in New York City. It's 28 feet high. This is a structure before it was faced off. 30 feet deep and 20 feet wide. This piece was was part of a project of 3 pieces, one here in Central Park, one on the Bronx River Parkway, and the third piece, The Rockers, was at the Hudson River Museum. The 2 pieces were built by a contractor from the plans that I supplied to them. Originally, I was supposed to build the pieces myself, but I felt it was a much more professional thing to do to have a contractor do it as in a public area where it could be guaranteed on a professional basis. This is the finished piece. There are a lot of people that are using the piece for a shelter while they're waiting for the bus. It was nice. It's a beautiful area for sculpture right there. It's a very festival-like environment with people coming and going constantly. When the piece was going up, it became quite a point of interest to find out what it was and what was going on. It was built in very difficult weather, snow and a lot of cold. The painting process was very difficult. The painter fell off the ladder and all kinds of things happened. don't, it doesn't really, but it does fit into, one pays some attention to it just simply in terms of economics and expedience in terms of building. Basically, it doesn't, but it does, you do pay attention to it, that's true, in terms of dimension. As I recall, I paid no attention to it in this instance in relation to this piece. And the contractors wanted to, by wanting to, meant that they would cut 8 inches off the piece, which I refused to do because it would make it easier for them.
Which site did you prefer? This one, say more so than the, in front of the Midland Bank in Buffalo, the SOM Plaza? Which site?
Well, this site here is a much more community-oriented, a much happier place. It's many, many more people. I think as sites go in terms of a communal feeling, that this is a much superior site. I like the other site just simply because it was stark, gave the opportunity to do something that was not interrupted. But I think that this site, as far as being human, is a much greater site. A lady is waiting for the bus. Okay, that's the end of the slides. So I'd be very happy to answer questions or, yeah.
Is this last piece still in plywood or has it been?
No, it's still in plywood, it's still up. There are no plans at the moment to have it fabricated or, dealt with in terms of steel. Surprisingly, no. I expected a lot, but nothing's happened. A few scuff marks, but I expected graffiti and everything else. It's just waiting for it, but nothing happened. Yeah.
How well do these pieces weather that you construct them? Are you intending to have any permanency as plywood so that they weather?
The pieces will weather. Not these pieces that I've shown you, because they weren't built to do that. But they will weather. A wooden piece will weather if it's maintained, if it's built with marine plywood or exterior plywood, and it's dealt with in a similar way that a house is dealt with. Houses last 100, 150 years. A plywood structure piece can last the same amount of time if it's dealt with properly, if it's the water's kept out of it, it's painted, say, once a year or once every 2 years, and the joints are sealed properly. There's no reason why a wooden piece can't exist for a long time. And we have a myth which is created by and even an antipathy to wooden pieces because they're supposed not to last. And it's true they have a lot more problems than steel does, but even to the extent where some people don't want a wooden piece, they don't want to show a wooden piece because it's not permanent. But it's not necessarily true. When I have a piece outside now, well, actually, this winter I've got 4 pieces outside. There are 3 of them that are going to deteriorate. The 4th one should make it. because it was refurbished with exterior plywood and was very carefully was done as an experiment, and I think it'll be all right. But it'll be maintained, though, you see. It won't just be left. No, this is a temporary piece. It was project was set up to last about a month, 2 months, and we're trying to get an extension on it now. Hopefully we will, maybe. Yeah.
I noticed in the brochure that you were a painter. Why you left painting?
I don't feel that I really left painting. I feel very nostalgic about it, and I'm still very fond of it. I don't paint anymore. The thing that happened was that I was making my own paint, and it got very, very thick. So the paintings I was doing became very bas-relief-like. In other words, I had like 4 inches of red, 6 inches of black. I mean, solid red, solid black, and it didn't seem to have the characteristic of a pure painting any longer. So from that point, I moved from a bas-relief kind of feeling in the paintings to using geometric shapes held out from the rectangle with threaded rods, and dealt with the shadow cast on the rectangle, and even to the point of painting the back of the forms. Again, this was not enough. It's like on the way somewhere. It's halfway between. So from that point on, I just went to the center of the room. And I love painting. I love color. And I think of painting in a very nostalgic sense. Yeah.
What is the material going to be for the Wallace piece?
We're planning at the moment, providing everything comes out all right. By that I mean the estimates. To do the material will be aluminum for the form and stainless steel for the U. Hopefully we can carry that out. It really has to do with the expense of the structure and if we can keep the costs down. But one of the reasons I want aluminum is that I want a very good surface on that piece. I want a black that's really singing, and I can't get it with steel because steel, the welding scars show up too much, and there's too much bellowing from the heat and too many warps. And if we can use aluminum, I think we'll be way ahead and have a piece with a tremendous amount of dignity. At least this is what we're trying for.
How many pieces did you actually have as sort of preliminaries or sketches before you came up with that one final solution for the wall?
I had another piece that I worked out for the site. The budget for the Wallace piece is $60,000. The estimate on the original idea was $80,000, so I discarded it. Also, I think if I had used that piece, I would have been in far more trouble than I eventually got myself into. Yeah.
Could you explain some of the methods and routines you go through in the commissioning process?
How to get it?
Obtaining a commission and how you do your proposal and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I usually get either a phone call or I get a letter from someone who has to do with the acquiring a sculpture. And what happens is that they send the same letter and make the same phone call to a number of other people, so we are in competition with each other at the beginning. And if one is lucky enough to be chosen, then, and we'll say one is awarded the commission itself, then immediately you have to go to the site and see it, see what you feel about it, see how it feels to you, see whether you can do anything, really do something in relation to the environment, to the building, to the feelings that you get, to the situation. For instance, the situation here is a government complex, which I think is a little bit different than another situation where the vibrations would be a little bit different. And then what I do is just simply spend a couple of days walking around the site, getting some photographs of it if I can, taking them back, and spending a couple of months just thinking, and maybe doing some very, very small sketches that nobody sees, and eventually coming up with an idea that I think will work in the space, and not only work in the space, but have very much to do with what I believe in terms of art. In other words, it has to be valid on my terms as well. And in other words, I'm just not doing a sculpture for somebody. I'm doing a sculpture basically for me, but using that environment as a source of an idea. So it's not that easy, though. It's very hard to get ideas, so I always try to tell people, okay, I'd love to try for it. If I can come up with an idea, great. If I can't, then perhaps somebody else can. And that's the only basis I can really work it on. In other words, if I can't do it, I can't do it, you know, in terms of a site. If it's not meaningful, then I won't do it. It's a pretty automatic process to get a commission, is if you're lucky enough to be included in competing with somebody else, just simply for them to decide on the basis of your past work. They make a decision. If you're lucky enough they choose you, then it's automatic from that point of you seeing the site, dealing with it, going back, taking a couple of months to work out ideas, and then submitting your ideas to them for their approval or whatever. Okay? Yeah.
There was a slide of the early work that was painted yellow, and you said you couldn't feel the color. Could you explain that to me?
Yeah. I feel, as far as I'm concerned, that I don't know how to maintain a solid form without using a single color. In other words, for me to use the kind of geometric shape that, or form that I'm using, and I don't know what to do in terms of painting it different colors. One side gets painted red, the other side white, the other side yellow. I don't know how to handle it. So since I want to, or I'm involved with one monolithic form, it's a solution for me to use black, white, or black and white. And if I use black and white, it's not that easy either, because I still want to separate the forms physically rather than with a painted edge. So that I keep saying I don't know how to use color in terms of structure, although I love color. And I do feel that the color in the rockers works. But I think it's also helped by the form, that the form tends to help the color separate. And that makes it all right. But I'm glad I stopped. And I think it's better for me not to at the moment. Anyway, someday I want to try again. Just one more time.
Where do you want to head in the future, to bigger art?
Do I want to get bigger? I want to get bigger, yeah. Pardon? I think, for me, the excitement or the kind of excitement that I can get from the kind of form that I want, it offers me more scope in terms of dimension. For some reason, scale is meaningful to me, and it doesn't have to be that big, actually. You're right. It broadens the scope of the idea for me to try to do something bigger. The outside, I really do want my sculpture to show up, say 400 feet away. I want it to exist at that distance in terms of actuality, as well as I do, 50 feet away or 20 feet away. So that I have to get bigger in order to achieve that. I can really answer that just simply by saying that it's more exciting to me to do that.
Are you talking about in cityscapes or?
Both, yeah. I wouldn't confine it just to the city, But that's an interesting point, that the city, the sculpture done in the city is a totally different environment from the one in the country. And it became very evident in terms of this past project, where the piece in the city became very aggressive, and the piece in the country became much more passive and more lyrical. Yeah. What? In my own steps, or say a fabricated steps? Well, I have a reluctance to build models. I don't like to. So what I like to do really is just have an idea of the piece, the dimensions, and I immediately start to build right away. And I'm willing to make certain errors and correct them at a later date in terms of the building. I do some working drawings for myself in order to find out angles and, say, a pitch or something like that, which is necessary. But I much prefer just simply to immediately build. And I have to build in sections in order to deal with the piece. I build in sections just heavy enough that I can lift. And the real beginning of the piece is down on the street, on the curb where the lumber truck drops the lumber, and then you pack it up on your back, up 4 flights of stairs, and that's where it starts. Yeah.
How do you find the public in general accepts your work after it's completed and in place?
I receive fairly good comments from friends and fellow artists, and unfortunately I lead a very limited social life, so I don't come in contact with too many others to find out exactly how they feel. I suspect that they probably have some problems with it. I wouldn't blame them. Yeah. Very much so, yes. I feel that New York offers opportunities that just simply would not come along if I were elsewhere. I also feel, this is very personal though, by the way, because there are people who can exist elsewhere and operate very easily. I can't do that. In other words, I have to be able to walk into a bar at night and come out a couple of hours later with a job for the next day, or be in a show or something like that. It works that way. Also, New York is, the energy in New York, one draws from that energy very much. The ideas one draws from, the ideas are constant. The constant coming in contact with other artists is extremely stimulating, and it's becomes very much a part of one's own work, almost as if they do your work for you and you do their work for them. It's that close. Yeah.
I have two questions. Is your studio in New York City or in Woodstock? And you hinted at problems with the Wallace sculpture. Would you like to elaborate on what they were?
The second part of the question I couldn't get.
You hinted at having problems with the Wallace sculpture, with either the architect or the landscape architect, either one. Would you like to elaborate on those problems?
Let's see. No, I think that the problems really arose simply because we were all there at the wrong time. And that if all three of us had been there at the same time, and that it was already a reality at that point that a sculpture was going to be erected on that site, and what kind of a sculpture that it might possibly be, and some kind of preservation of the site could have been dealt with at that time instead of carrying through plans of, we'll say, landscaping, which they have, it's completely, from their point of view, totally right. This is to enhance the building, and this is for the people. But at the same time, it produces a very, very busy area to put a sculpture in. And I think that if the timing is right and everyone can get together at the same time, a lot of these problems can be eliminated. I live in New York City. Yeah. A favorite? No, I like them all.
Would you share with us what artists you do get sympathy from or with or bounce off ideas with?
Al Held. There are a number of younger artists that I'm very close to that I see a great deal of the time, and we share our lives in other ways, like we do certain things together, and art is paramount, and so I get a lot from them. No, I'm awfully sorry, I couldn't hear a word.
In your last slide set, the one in New York City, Central Park,
Right.
how did you come about concluding that you did a certain angle with the outside?
I wanted to produce a form that would have to have something to do with the skyscrapers. And the buildings are really very high right there, or as a matter of fact, all over New York City. And when you follow if you take your eye and you go right up that incline, and you continue on, you're suddenly up there all the way at the top of the buildings, and it's a fantastic sight. The whole thing's like a panorama, but it's so far away that and it's a vista that it's breathtaking. This was a desire to produce a piece that would make one look in that direction. It was accidental in terms of finding the right angle. The right angle had to be had to do with the piece. It was very personal in that sense. Yeah. No, I didn't. I have a friend who is a personal photographer who takes them. Yeah.
Do you build a full-scale sculpture then, and then,
No. In dealing with a commission, I'm forced to produce a model, which is information for them in terms of the idea. From that model then goes to a fabricator, and it's of help to him and information for him in terms of the actual construction of the piece. Thank you.
We'd like to thank you all for coming tonight and invite you to come down to the reception now upstairs at the Brunier.